So welcome to Dawn Laney. Many of you know Dawn. Dawn is like Dr. Rob, well-known, well-respected in our community and does so much for us. So thank you for being here.
Okay, Rob just queued me up like none other because I'm going to talk about the study he just mentioned. So, thanks, Rob. So this is a little bit interactive. Not as interactive as it's been in the past. I'm sorry I won't have you yelling busted quite as much. But we're going to still talk about cool stuff, and I want to hear from you as we go. These are my disclosures. All right. So, you guys, what is the easiest, most equal, most effective, and earliest way to diagnose Fabry disease? Family history, for sure. What's another good way?
Genetic testing.
Yes. On who? Thank you! The easiest, best, most effective way to figure out if somebody has Fabry disease is to look at the family, who's at increased risk, and test them, right? All those things. And newborn screening, which is not available in all states, but is available in a growing number. But this is newborn screening. Does anybody, like, sometimes you never hear about newborn screening. They take your baby away, they come back with a Band-Aid on their heel. Newborn screening is basically when you get the dried blood spot from the heels of the baby, and they test for all sorts of yucky things that could happen when they're babies. Fabry disease, I would argue, based on my data, is something that can impact the baby early on too, and makes sense to me to do Fabry newborn screening, but not everybody necessarily agrees. Every state gets to decide for itself. Anybody here know if your state screens for Fabry disease? Hey, over there! Yay. Which state? Tennessee! Tennessee, definitely.
We actually found out my nephew has it because of his newborn screening.
There you go. Tennessee does, which we found actually through multiple ways. Missouri was the first state who did it. Illinois was not far behind, doing good work there. We've got New Mexico, who voted a long time ago to get it active, I believe is finally active now. North Carolina just signed up. And Georgia is deciding in 2 weeks. So we're going, yep. Oh, Oregon too. Michigan, yes, Michigan's begun. And there's a pilot study in New York. I think, oh, Maryland. I think Maryland's doing it too. So as you see, we've got 50 states. That's not all of them by any means. And that's because in newborn screening, each state gets to decide for itself what it does. Interesting system, right? Okay. Or again, Missouri was the first. They kind of led the way. And they did it through this little machine you see there. And what they did is they looked for 4 lysosomal storage diseases. So Fabry disease is a lysosomal storage disease. And they looked for Fabry, Gaucher, MPS1, and Pompe, and then they looked for Krabbe soon after that. They were not ready. They were 100% not ready to do this testing, but it was put into a law, and so they had to figure out how to do it. And so they did it. And we are so grateful to the people of Missouri because they had to kind of work out all the kinks until we figured out, we're not quite there yet, but a better way to do newborn screening for Fabry disease. When they went through this journey, they found babies who had A143T, which is a change in the gene which can cause everything from most severe Fabry disease to nothing, as we understand it now. And if you look in the literature, you look at studies, it'll show you that exact thing. People who had classic Fabry disease to people who had nothing. And so we go back and forth and back and forth. If you are a parent whose baby was just told that they had this change, you don't care about the debate. You want to know what's going to happen with your baby. And so what I did is I looked at all the questions that are out there, all the parents who are like, what do we do? And mind you, we're not doing this in Georgia, but if you guys know Jack Johnson was like, Dawn, we're going to go on a 4-city tour in 1 week and all through Missouri to talk about newborn screening in babies, because they had all of these questions that were coming up from parents who didn't know what to do with their babies, and doctors who were like, I don't know what Fabry is. I don't know what this A143T thing is. And there are 4 centers that was taking care of patients, and they all did something slightly different. So just talking to families when I did this tour, as we zoomed around Missouri, I realized we had to do something. And that something turned into a 10-year study. Data we had was really strong. You'll see Rob's paper up here, Dr. Rob's paper, that told us that when we looked backwards, Then it looked like pain and symptoms seemed to start around age 7 for boys and around 9 for women. But if you're looking at the baby in front of you, the small child in front of you, it seemed that things were starting a little bit earlier, but nobody had told us, looking forward prospectively, instead of back in our rearview mirror, what's going on. Because when you ask a 30-year-old when they had pain when they were younger, what are they going to say? Like, I don't know, forever, or maybe when I was 5. If you start asking parents when the baby is a newborn, they're going to give you the up-to-date, once-a-year report on what's happened in real time. And that's what I did. So we call it a longitudinal study, which means it was a long time that I collected this data. And thanks to my friends in Missouri who also joined me in this, and 1 or 2 from Ohio and a few from around other places as people moved around. And so I want you to look at this picture. You will notice there are 2 children in this picture. Those are my critters, and they are boys, and that's how old they were when I started this study, just for perspective. That's Jacob, the big one, and that's Zach, the little one in the stroller. So I wrote a protocol. I shopped it around, got a little money so that I could send out things through FedEx and do some genetic testing on urine, because I thought, well, we could do tried blood spots, but then I'm asking parents to do this every year, and what if we just looked at the amount of GL3 and other different biomarkers in urine so that we could just ship pee all over the United States, and we could not stick people. So I was like, let's make it as easy as possible. We'll ask questions, and we'll get pee. Well, we got data, and finally everybody's enrolled around 2023, and there's once a year I get these boxes, and these boxes are great because what we did is we shipped out these boxes with questionnaires in them, and like collection tubes, and like a bag to put the questionnaires in so they come back, and then people put ice in a bag and the samples, and they ship it back to us. Well, these boxes, I'm here to tell you, come in dripping wet, no matter what we do. Parents do a great job, and when we receive it, they're dripping boxes. And we're currently in dripping box season in our office, and I always say, like, if it's a dripping box, open it now and stick the samples in the freezer. So everybody is very familiar with dripping boxes. So this is kind of the smaller version of what it looks like in my office around this season when everybody's sitting back there dripping boxes. And this is where the kids were when we got everybody enrolled. You can see they got a little bigger, no strollers involved anymore. In the meantime, newborn screening has grown and grown and grown. This is, let's see, who did I forget? I forgot that South Carolina is going to start. And there is bills in progress for Virginia and Kentucky and Massachusetts and Minnesota. Finally, in 2024, I had all the data I needed. And it was a lot of data. It was perhaps too much data, but there's never such thing as too much data. And what I had to do was take this data and make sense of it, and make it so it was something useful instead of just little data points that are there so that families could use it, so that the doctors taking care of babies diagnosed through family or newborn screening were able to use it. And believe it or not, for all those years, we only did 5 years at that point because the study was supposed to be 5 years. Now, mind you, I'm continuing the study. It's not stopping. I still have soggy boxes. But we ended up with 40 people in the study. And not everybody was of one type. I mean, don't get me wrong, they were all white, non-Hispanic, which is frustrating, but at the same time, when we started newborn screening in Missouri, we had a limited population to work with. We had everybody whose babies were under 49 months when they consented, and the reason it was 49 months is because we found one baby, and then we found their older sibling, So we had a range in ages of how we had in there. We had 14 diagnosed through newborn screening, 14 through family history, so those are mostly our classic families. And then we had 26 through newborn screening, 15 with classic changes, so those are the most severe ones, the ones that Rob was talking about, that we'd expect to find symptoms in childhood. And then we had 6 with non-classic, which we always talk about not having symptoms in childhood, but we didn't know for sure, so this was a good way to find out. And then we had a bunch of patients with that A143T controversial variant. Perfect, because we needed to know what was going on for them as kids too. So what did we do? I told you we got P. We had parents fill out a questionnaire. We asked for a record release, so we could grab medical records and kind of compare what they told their doctors versus what they were telling us. And we did this study that's all about GI stuff, because we believe that one of the earlier symptoms we might find would be gastrointestinal stuff, so diarrhea, bloating, constipation in these little babies. All right, So what about the patients who had A143T? So we're going to go through different groups of kids as we go. A143T, again, controversial change. We see everything across the spectrum of Fabry disease with symptom onset. What we found is that only one kid had elevated biomarkers in their urine, just one. And when we looked at, and he didn't even have A143T. He had a different variant. So I had two other brothers that we had in there too. He had a couple GI symptoms, but he didn't have a pattern. And what you'll see when we get to classic Fabry disease is kids with classic Fabry disease have a pattern that starts really early of symptom onset. Well, about non-classic, remember these are the people who were like, no, they don't have any childhood symptoms. Well, one kid I reclassified to classic Fabry disease because it was so obvious. When we looked at the pattern of biomarkers, right, if we expect to see biomarkers elevated, telling us that somebody, we expect to have symptoms for Fabry disease right now, only one person did. Everybody with non-classic Fabry disease as a kid had stable, nothing biomarkers, except for this one kid who had markers like he had classic Fabry disease. And his symptoms that came on with the gastrointestinal pain, with the diarrhea, followed that classic pattern, and his gradual lack of sweating. So I was like, isn't that convenient? Urine on kids that we could test for lyso-Gb3 and regular GL3 told us when some newborn might be more classic, non-classic, or we don't quite know. That's a victory. It sounds so small, you guys, but until that point, nobody had said, these newborns, if it's high, it's probably classic, and we need to watch them closer when they're a baby. That's pretty cool. Because now we can tell parents, this change that your baby has, we're worried about having more symptoms when they're little, let's see them more frequently, and this is what I want you to watch out for. Or, which is kind of a nice change, right? We have looked at the gene change your kid has, we've looked at the biomarkers. It looks like they're not gonna have symptoms at this time, and maybe we can keep talking, but not do as much intensive treatment and testing right now. Big deal. How about our classic guys? Well, in our babies, like Sarah was alluding to, we see symptoms of Fabry disease that are pretty non-specific, which means you wouldn't necessarily know they were Fabry or not related, but it follows a pattern of getting worse from the time they are very little. I mean, just pick one here, bloating. Nobody ever talks about bloating in Fabry disease. I mean, you guys do. I hear you talk about it. But with bloating in these little kids, we saw the earliest report at 10 months old in males and 8 in females. That's baby, right? That's when somebody's going to tell you it's colic or give them a little Similacon. That's pretty early on. How about diarrhea? Well, when you've got a little kid, right, and they're breastfed, it's kind of hard to tell it's diarrhea or breastfed poop. By the time they get to 12 months of old, we were seeing it in boys who are kind of reaching the end of their breastfed journey, like they're eating solids now, so we wouldn't expect straight up liquid stuff. Constipation, abdominal pain. And the thing that stopped me in my tracks is that we got to a point, and this is the boys and girls, that they had at least one episode of severe abdominal pain that stopped them in their tracks. They weren't going to watch TV, they weren't going to read a book, they weren't going to play because the abdominal pain was that bad. And it was when they were 48 months old in males, so that's age 4, and 75 in females, keeping in mind I only had 3 classic females in this part. Stopping everything. That should turn on its head for you when we should start therapy. If the pain is so bad that a child can do nothing else, that tells you they needed treatment, maybe before they had that pain. Burning pain, 28 months, so just over 2 in males. And for girls, 44 months. Again, early pain. And you watch it grow. And that's when I made these pictures, because I think sometimes looking at a picture is a little bit easier. And what it does is it shows you that the way the symptoms progress, you start with being bloated and gassy when you're younger, then you move into chronic diarrhea, then you have a chronic abdominal pain, so belly pain all the time they're complaining about. Then moving into constipation, diarrhea, and then those severe stomach pains. This is all before age 5. How about the whole heat situation? We know that heat intolerance and decreased sweating is more about nerves than it is about clogging up your pores or something. Well, starting with flushing, right, no big deal, we just cool them off, right? But then pretty quickly it moved to the fact, that's a typo, heat and cold intolerance. Heat and cold intolerance, where suddenly they just couldn't be out in the heat playing, or they couldn't be in the too cold, causing problems for them. Then, small amounts of sweating. So people had normal sweating until this point because I asked, does your child sweat normally? Do they not sweat normally? A little bit of sweat? They got no sweat now. And then boom, 4 years old, median of 60 months, no sweating. If lack of sweating and gradual loss of sweating has to do with our nerves and what's going on with our kids and their nerves, we probably need to start treatment before they have serious nerve damage that has caused them to stop sweating. We probably need to start treatment before we're in lack of sweating time. So that means we're looking at before they get low sweating maybe, before they get no sweating for sure, but is that talking about 2 to 4 months of age, or 2 to 4 years of age? I think that's what we're talking about. Now, can treatment still do so much good after that point? Absolutely. But if our goal is to have kids who can do everything and not have pain, I think we're looking at a treatment before they have lack of sweating. How about pain? Some of the most powerful things I heard was when the kids got old enough to put their own words on paper. So there's these questionnaires where kids can, color, you've probably seen these, they can color parts of the body that hurts, they can tell you what words they use to describe their pain. And I had 2 kids who said their neuropathic pain is like stabbing pain or like a Minecraft pickaxe in their foot. That's pretty descriptive. And this pain, these are in kids, again, I started looking at them when they were well under 5. And we're looking at having that consistent burning pain by the time they were 48 to 71 months. So that's like 4 to 5 years of age. So not too far off of what we found from our retrospective data. But this is pain. This isn't GI stuff. This is where they're having it every day. Do we want a kid having pain every day? No, because then they're not going to go to school as much, right? They're going to go to the doctor more. They're not going to be happy. I mean, don't get me wrong. All our kids are very strong, and they will rise above this. However, if we could start treatment before they have pain, I think it's going to make a huge difference. Because it's hard to get rid of pain when it's established. Once somebody has chronic daily pain, it doesn't go away as well. And when I looked at, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'll go back. When I looked at our 3 kiddos who started treatment during our studies, all these 3 guys had classic Fabry disease. They all started after they had the neuropathic pain, lack of sweating, and GI pain. Because remember, I didn't tell them to do anything from this study. This was just, what are you doing? What are you doing now? This is just purely observational. They had less pain, yay! They had less GI pain, yay! They had some minor improvements in sweating. Okay, good, we like sweat. And they didn't progress, and nobody had developed angiokeratomas. We didn't even got to spot time yet. And their urinary barcodes went, wah! So their biomarkers were high in their urine, and they went, shoop, down to where 0. That's pretty cool. All those are amazing things. But they continued to have intermittent neuropathic pain, intermittent GI symptoms, and still had decreased sweating. To me, that says these kiddos, we were watching, and maybe we could have started them a little bit earlier, and maybe it would have made a little bit of difference in who they are now. Now, don't be beating yourself up and being like, oh, I know my kid had it at birth, and I should have started treatment earlier. No, no, no. This is not the you did bad talk. You are doing a great job, all of you. Amazing. Amazing, right? But what if, with newborn screening, we have the opportunity to tell parents that starting earlier will be better? Instead of where you guys are, where we're like, we're wishy-washy, we have no data, let's just watch your child, right? Anybody heard that? It's a good song. Good song? Yeah. I'm as guilty as the wishy-washy song as anybody else. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. These are biomarkers. Nobody loves biomarkers. Biomarkers are like, you pee in a cup, we take your blood, we look for what's stored in your body. And you can see here, with our classic kiddos, they had high biomarkers in their urine from the time they were very small. And in fact, the very first sample I got from the youngest child, the urine GL3s are so high they're not on this graph because they were that high. Turns out all babies very early on have elevated lyso-GL3 in their urine. So take that with a grain of salt. But once we started looking at them a little bit later, everybody had large amounts of biomarkers. Until you see those stars, that's when those 2 kids started therapy, and it dropped down to 0. That's that one kid that I told you, I was like, that kid doesn't have non-classic Fabry disease. Turns out, over the course of the study, that mutation did get reclassified to classic. But I saw it in the urine first. I was like, and then looking at his symptoms over time. Look at every other kid with non-classic Fabry disease, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So if you're looking at a kid who's not a newborn, but maybe just a little bit after that, and looking at their biomarkers, in urine at least, they were easy to distinguish between those who'd have early symptoms and those who wouldn't. That's important because if we're sitting in front of a parent and we say, we looked at your kid's biomarkers and they were very low, then we probably don't have to start treatment between age 2 to 4. Cool. Nothing's perfect, but here's the pattern. It's busy, 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 busy. But just think of it as like a train table, right? If you're like, okay, I'm looking for my kid who's got classic Fabry disease who's never had treatment. Do we expect the GL3 to be elevated? And the answer is yes. Or you were like, hey, my kid has this common strange variant A143T, looking at their total lyso-Gb3, do we expect it to be elevated? And the answer is sometimes, because there's different values with underlying, we call them analogs, but basically there's like tiny little versions of what we can see under what we call you, when we tell you you've got your total lyso-GL3, your total lyso-GL3. This is like the underlying things. And I didn't mention it, but GL3 and lyso-GL3, GL3 and GB3, that's the same thing. People use them interchangeably. Usually if you're from Canada or outside the US, you'll say GB3, and if you're in the US, you'll say GL3. Same biomarker, same giant marker that's huge and stores up in the cells. And lyso is just kind of a cousin molecule that we talk about too. Lyso seems to be a little bit better than straight up GL3. All right. Even though my blood, sweat, and tears and your pee came into this study, this is not a perfect study by any means. I did not have kids who were non-white. That's not cool. We need to see what's going on people who are non-white. Also, I didn't have siblings that I just tossed in there to see what happened, just being a kid the same age. I did compare them to the general population, so if you look at my numbers, you'll see that the kids definitely had elevated rates of bloating and constipation, diarrhea, all that stuff, and obviously your average kid doesn't have burning pain. I only got, depending on the kid and when they enrolled, sometimes I got a lot of samples over the course of the study, and sometimes I just had 1 or 2 because they dropped out, or sometimes I had 1 every other year because parents couldn't make it work for a particular year. But that's what happened. And I used urine because then people didn't have to get blood draws, and I didn't have to, send out all the lancets and stuff. But right now in the US, we don't really have an easy way to test urine on the kids anymore. LabCorp used to do that test, but they don't anymore. So really, we have to take these findings and see how they compare to blood. Fortunately, some of that work is being done. Like Illinois, Lurie Children's is doing a great job of monitoring their newborn screening kids, and we can use their blood biomarkers to compare to my urine biomarkers, and they're they correlate pretty much. Not perfect, but pretty good. Also, I didn't retest everybody's enzyme levels. I just took what they had from their medical records. So not one lab did all the tests. And you've probably heard before that each lab is a little bit different. So it would have been a better study if I'd gotten blood from everybody and tested everybody again, but I didn't. 10 years back, right? You can't be a quarterback looking back. But what does all that mean? That means we now have information that we can use that gives us a little bit more insight. When do we should start treatment for kids with Fabry disease? Whether they're classic, non-classic, or have A143T, we can now give some real data to some parents who are wondering. It means that looking at biomarkers sometimes can give us a better clue of who might need to be treated earlier or later, and that classic Fabry disease starts early in childhood and has life-impacting symptoms well before we thought they did. So that's my story, and now I'll take all your questions. These are those kids now. They're taller than me, one's in college, so MOPPet Study and my children both grew up around the same time.
And Jacob is a pilot?
Jacob is a pilot.
At how old?
Yeah, if you live in Florida, sometimes my child is zooming around your head, see, just right over you. And my little one likes to do blacksmithing, so, you know.
Thank you so much, Dawn. So we have 4 minutes. So if you have more than one question, just please ask one first, and then give someone else a turn, and we'll get back to the panel if we don't get them all answered.
Hi, Dawn.
Hey.
Nice to see you. I was wondering if there's any information on studies or suggestions about nutrition now as we get older to help our
Yeah,
bodies.
so this is actually a really important topic that we need to dive into really deep. And I talked to Julia. Julia had some great ideas, Julia Alton from Canada, and had somebody who would work really well with her. I have tried so hard to get our metabolic dietitians interested, and they're like, where's the money? And I'm like, I don't have any money for you. But we need to do more with nutrition and dietitian. Not just getting older, but when our kids are younger. I would argue that every person in this room who has Fabry disease knows what makes things worse, what their triggers are, but there's also things we need to think about to help our bodies be healthier with Fabry disease. We were just talking yesterday about how intestines, when you have Fabry disease, particularly when you have a lot of GI symptoms, you're not absorbing all the vitamins you would like to. If you have heat intolerance, you're not going out into the sun, so your vitamin D is not as high as you would like it to be. None of ours is, but particularly if you're avoiding it more than average. We need more work on that, and it's a real area that I feel is really upcoming. Right now I'm working on women's health, and that's like on my whiteboard of things that I really want to learn more about. There's a couple studies, I looked the other day, there's a couple studies that have been looking at things like FODMAP diet, which is basically like you take everything away and then add back stuff gradually to see how it works in your body, that have been out there. And there's been some studies looking at vitamin levels, and some studies looking at alpha-galactosides, the oral one, Beano, which is kind of a dietary supplement. So these are the kind of things that you can ask your doctor about, and they can at least look up what's in the literature, but there's not enough. And what I would love to do is like grow up a baby dietitian to just focus on Fabry disease and see what they can come up with. But I'd argue that we have the same issue with gastrointestinal symptoms. We need both a GI doc, gastroenterologist, and a nutritionist, and if they could work together, so much the better. There's also renal dietitians, so if you're in renal failure, the dietitians know really well how to help you take care of your kidneys to make them last longer, but that's not really focused on Fabry.
And we didn't stage this, but it was a good coincidence that Jacob is a young pilot. Jenny has been an airline pilot for over 30 years.
Amazing.
Did I get that right? So awesome. Another question? Right next to you, Michelle.
So is there any sort of research in pediatrics in sensory issues that may come along with, how am I trying to say this? Like with autism-related behavioral issues where a child may not be able to say, I'm having pain or I'm having issues, but I'm going to act out because this is bothering me. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Like
absolutely. Absolutely.
But maybe Fabry related.
Yeah, I would say two parts of the question. One, which is, has anybody looked at when they're nonverbal? And one of the things that I got anecdotally from the parents in the MOPPet study is they would say things like, well, here's what my kid does. They're 18 months old, they figured out how to walk, they run around the couch, they run around the couch, they run around the couch, they sit down, they hold their feet. Doesn't seem to be hurting them because they're not crying or telling me they're hurting, but something's different. And they wait 15 minutes, and they get up and they run around the couch. So I would say there's behaviors that we definitely see and hear from, and that's before they're verbal. But the other part is, has anybody looked more into autism, sensory issues, all the things that come with, that we see in kids, right? And there's been just a couple little studies that were trying to figure out if it was increased in Fabry disease, and in those studies it was not, but at the same time I think we need to do a more systematic look, and that hasn't been done yet. So, more things for the whiteboard. Rob?
But there is a behavioral phenotype in Fabry disease, and some of the things in the adults do overlap with autism-like behaviors.
Yeah, so behavioral differences in adults with Fabry disease that overlap with autism-like phenotype.
It is therefore possible that we will see increased tendencies towards autism if we do a big, careful study. That hasn't been done.
Yeah. There was a little study into ADHD that Nadia Ali did that's found that in adults with Fabry disease, they have increased rate of ADHD. And the question is that because of pain? Is that because of medical distraction? Or is it something different? And we definitely see increased anxiety and depression in Fabry disease. So they've kind of been picking off those pieces, and now we need to go a little deeper. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a good question. So what we're doing now is we're listening, and we're putting more ideas on the whiteboard.
Do we have another question? Oh, actually, we can't have another question.
We're done. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'll be at camp. You can ask me any questions as we go along.